they announced that they're going to have an event on March 25th. And again, I think it's obviously not in the same area, but it kind of makes you question what Apple's on about these days. That it's rumored that the majority of this event is going to be actually focused on services and them sort of pushing into news and TV subscriptions, a bit like Apple Music, but for news and TV. And going along with that they've apparently been funding their own original TV shows, which, again, we'll get to that in a minute because there's an interesting comedic sidebar to that one. But I'm just wondering if you go back a bit further, Netflix, I guess, started this and set the standard, but now it seems like the whole point of getting away from cable was to not pay the exorbitant fees and get content we didn't want. Now we're getting 100 different subscription services, and we have to subscribe to all of them to get everything we want to see.
Yeah.
And now Apple's throwing themselves into the ring here, and then there's Disney's doing their thing, and it's like you're not going to buy 10 different services. You may the most you might max out is at 3. So what are they going to bring to it to dislodge anyone else from the table? And what was really odd for me is that I would have thought that the easiest thing for them to do, say with the TV and movie stuff, is just flick a switch so that you can subscribe to all of their content in iTunes, and that's it. Why are they going to the extent of doing original shows when it's not even their forum, so to speak?
Well, this reminds me of something Steve Jobs actually said about Microsoft, back in the day where, their problem was the sales team was running Microsoft. And, I wouldn't know if that was true at Apple or not, but, the market's very different now. You're not just selling a device, you're selling a range of devices. And on top of that, you're actually selling content as well. And Apple's ecosystem, as we know, is a lockdown ecosystem. And, within that, you've got Apple TV, you've got iTunes, you've got content, music, video, as well as the apps, and Apple controls what happens inside there. So I guess it's a logical progression. They would have done their research. It might seem a bit crazy what they're doing first out, and maybe it is a mistake, but I would say that it's probably based around the fact that they need to find ways to keep people in their ecosystem. And if they can do that effectively enough for long enough, they can probably force good deals with the other content platforms. And I'd say that's probably their strategy, although I wouldn't know. They're certainly in a position to be able to dictate, but as we've seen in the past, not everyone likes Apple's sort of, I guess, the way they divvy up control or cash. And, I guess if you don't like Apple, you can always go to Android, so, where it's free for all.
Exactly.
And you will have to subscribe to 6 different services.
Well, that's the interesting thing. You mentioned the control. There's other stories about from Tim Cook down providing notes to all these people that they've signed up to produce original content, and then that's leading to a sense of frustration, I believe it's been described, from the people that are trying to make these things, to the extent that it's almost worse than, say, Disney, where they've got a very family-focused sort of thing, and they won't produce certain things under the specific Disney label, and Apple seems to be going down this path as well. And it's like, well, why bother just even getting into that space and doing a sort of a nanny state type thing if you're trying to promote a service that's based on creative content, which should be given a bit more leeway in terms of what's produced. And
I guess that's, you've hit on a really good point there, and that's where probably a lot of the friction is. The funny thing is if Disney is nanny state, which they are about the content they produce, everyone goes, oh, that's okay because they're Disney. They're all about kids. They've been all about kids for 100 years. Apple's moving into a market with music, and we all know the extremes of music that can be got, and the same with content. And if you don't have a framework like Disney's that started off with Mickey Mouse and, all these lovable kitty, characters, then, to shape that and to demand that we have good family values. And who knows what good family values are? I mean, where do they start and finish?
Which I think is the point.
Which is the point. Yeah. So effectively, you've got an art critic, and you come up with an idea for a show, and it ticks all the boxes. But then you have a kiss that goes 2 seconds too long in a scene.
Yeah.
And Tim Cook's there going, no, we can't have that. and that would be very frustrating. We know that as producers and directors. So I guess that's something that now we just need to watch, because I don't think Apple can get away with it. And yet this would make sense at a boardroom level. This makes perfect sense. Because Tim Cook has flagged over the last couple of years, belief in privacy, family values, and, sort of really a community within Apple. So that makes good sense at a boardroom level, that's what you would develop. That would be your, part of your business plan and corporate responsibility. Yep. But I guess the reality is to actually create it and make it happen is a lot more difficult when you're dealing with third parties.
That's true. I think an aspect to this, which we've sort of touched on, is they're needing a more stable revenue source that they can rely on, and services is a obvious example of that. Because unlike a big bang release like with the iPhone, where they get a big hit when it's released, and then it's sort of they're still making a gazillion dollars out of it, so they're not suffering in that way, but it's kind of like a big hit and then it sort of tails off. This is like Office 365 or any sort of subscription. They can just it just keeps coming in each month. It keeps building if they promote it right, and that's the type of thing that Wall Street loves, and they keep getting their sort of bottom line taken care of. But what I find interesting too is that that is actually having an impact on, of all places, the iPod line, from what I've been reading, that the iPod, for all intents and purposes, really, what is the purpose of it being there anymore? Yet they can actually invest in it, from what I've seen, as being like the absolute lowest cost device to get into the ecosystem, and it's still worth them having it in the lineup, so people can, because you could plug it into a TV and watch all the content, or listen to it with your headphones or whatever when you go out. So they're actually looking at potentially bringing in a refreshed version, 4 or 5 years after the last one, however long it was that that one came out. And it still has a relevance, which is fascinating that they can do that. Along the lines of doing the other usual refreshes and stuff, but I think what will remain to be seen, though, with the services part of it, is that that's not necessarily their forte. So going back to how iCloud started, or what was it, Mobile Me? That was the one that Steve Jobs went off his nut about. They just haven't, as a tech company, compared to, say, Google and Microsoft, who are far more sort of adept in the services business. They have catching up to do, and maybe this is a step in that direction.
Look, I agree, and I think once again, Microsoft is a good example of a company that completely has reinvented itself now through hardware, and also what you're outlining there is indicative. So they didn't sell as many iPhones last time around. The iPhone cycle between people buying their next iPhone is longer than ever before, by a whole 6 months or whatever it is, And so the pressure at Wall Street level would be, well, what's your bread and butter, Apple? What's always going to bring money in and out of, into the company? And, so it's got to be content, it's got to be subscription, and it's got to be service-based. And so that's what I think you'll find Apple are trying to do. And traditionally, though, it's not actually their market, even though they invented the post-PC era through the App Store, I think. That now that's actually quite an old model. And, the change in the media landscape and, content landscape as well has really radically, made that model, I guess, not obsolete, because it's still very relevant, but the way in which you make it, put it to the forefront has to be new or has to be refreshed. And in this day and age, when you've got systems and very intricate systems. We take them all for granted.
Hmm.
But, Apple can't really build out and open up its platform now, even if it wanted to. So that then limits options straight away. So you're forced then to say, well, we're going to have a Apple content stream that we own.
Yep.
So I think these are the sorts of things that Apple is now grappling with. And, this probably flows back then into, the content guys talking to the device guys and the device guys changing things but not consulting the PC guys within Apple. So maybe it just works for iOS, because everything I see these days, I mean, if you look at the latest Samsung phone, the Galaxy 10 and everything else, no one even talks about laptops anymore. No one even really talks about tablets anymore. It's all mobile devices, and mobile device just means a phone.
Yep.
So,
except for someone like me who likes to rant about changes to Apple's laptops.